Mr. President, do you think it's time for Prime Minister Netanyahu to do more on this issue? Do you think he's doing enough?
No.
No, that was President Biden claiming yesterday that Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu is not doing enough to secure a hostage deal with Hamas. Biden's remarks coming as he was headed into the Situation Room, where he and Vice President Kamala Harris were briefed. They were briefed by the hostage deal negotiating team after the murders of 23-year-old Israeli-American hostage Hirsch Goldberg Poland and 5 others by Hamas in Rafah over the weekend. Hamas now appears to suggest that the 6 hostages were deliberately executed because they were about to be rescued by Israeli forces, and warned others could suffer the same fate if they find out that Israeli Defense Forces are getting close to rescuing any hostages. Meanwhile, in Israel, thousands of citizens on strike, protesting in the streets yesterday over their government's failure to reach a hostage deal. Joining me now is Fox News senior strategic analyst. He's chairman of the Institute for the Study of War, General Jack Keane. General, great to see you. What a mess. Your reaction?
Yeah, well, I think we knew it would come down to this. When Hamas took the 250 hostages, something unprecedented in their previous portfolio, I do believe the Iranians had some influence over it because the Iranians have been taking hostages for decades. We knew that at the end of the day, they would keep a number of hostages for what reason? To force Israel to leave Gaza, to end the hostilities, so that the leadership and some of the fighting force could survive. That is the point that we're at right now. And it's really tough, certainly, for people who have families and loved ones who are hostages. But at the end of the day, what Prime Minister Netanyahu is thinking about is the survival of the state of Israel, which is being threatened by Hamas and the proxies that Iran has operationalized around them. That has got to be his focus. We saw him years ago give up 1,000 Palestinian prisoners for 1 Israeli soldier. And so why isn't he doing something like that now, given there's supposedly 100 hostages being taken? What is the difference? The threat to the survival of the state of Israel. When he gave up those 1,000 Palestinian prisoners, that was not the fact. It was just an exchange. The state of Israel is on the line here. He knows full well that he needs to have a presence in Gaza to ensure that they don't regroup and reattack. It'll be inevitable if he leaves the leadership and elements of the fighting force intact to do that. So we're arguing over certain places where Israel wants to keep the troops, the Philadelphia corridor, the Netzarim line, etc. But the reality is Netanyahu knows he has to keep a presence in there to ensure these people do not rise again and reattack. And that is really the issue. So is that by definition a priority over the hostages? The facts do speak for themselves. That is the case. That's the challenge he has. The recent poll I've seen in Israel is 49% agree with him, 46% disagree with him. So obviously the population is split over this issue, and it's understandable the emotions that are being impacted here, certainly. But I do believe that the Prime Minister's focus on his state and the survival of all the people at stake here is the right issue.
But what is he supposed to do at this point, knowing that if they get close, Israeli Defense Forces get close, Hamas is threatening that they're going to execute whatever hostages are poised to get rescued? I mean, that's what happened here, we're told, that the 6 hostages were there in the tunnels. They knew that the Israeli Defense Forces were close. They were above ground. They were about to rescue the hostages. So what does Hamas do? They execute the 6 hostages.
Yeah, I don't think that's changed from the very beginning. I think at any time, if the Israeli forces were going to get close to the hostages, they would kill them. It was absolutely a blessing for them to be able to go into 2 buildings and rescue hostages out of there, and those hostages not being killed. And I think the fact that there are 35 other hostages supposedly also dead is likely as a result of this policy that they've had, I think, from day one. They were never going to give up hostages to the Israeli forces without a fight or without killing the hostages. I think that policy has existed. They're just using this with those photos to inflame the emotions of the Israeli people and people around the world, certainly, to put more pressure on the regime. Remember what this is about. Sinwar and his leaders want to survive, and also with a portion of that fighting force to survive. That's what's on the table here. Netanyahu knows that's really what the issue is all about here.
So it's just so upsetting. I want to get your take on the Taliban as well, because the Wall Street Journal is reporting that the family of George Gesman, a Delta Airlines mechanic who was seized by the Taliban in Afghanistan in December of 2022, they say they're going to negotiate directly with the Taliban to try to secure the wrongfully detained American's release. His wife, Alexandra Gesman, is scheduled to meet with White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan on September 11th, but hopes for earlier discussions over fear that her husband's death is rapidly deteriorating. The family's meeting with the Taliban is also reportedly on hold for now, until U.S. officials meet with the terrorist organization. But they've warned if no imminent progress is made, they plan to travel to Doha to meet with the Taliban representative to get her husband back, General.
Yeah, well, you can certainly understand the feelings of the family here. I mean, if they feel, that no progress is being made, they're not getting all the information that they would like to have, they certainly want the government to put all the pressure they can to seek his release. But if they think they're being frustrated, I certainly understand them going directly to try to solve this problem. It's very understandable to do that. I think they're going to give the United States government one more opportunity here to work a deal. I mean, I suspect, Maria, what we've seen before is what the Taliban would want is more exchange of prisoners coming out of Gitmo. For this person's life. That's probably what the negotiation is about. We don't know the details of it. But listen, I'm sympathetic with the family here. If they don't think progress is being made, they don't want to sit on their hands while their loved one's life just erodes because of their health problems.
And look, we're looking at hotspots all across the world. Russia is targeting Ukraine with a wave of drone and missile attacks yesterday. Children across the country prepared to return to school after the summer vacation, and several explosions are rocking Kyiv. Debris from intercepted missiles and drones yesterday damaged 2 kindergartens, according to Ukraine's Interior Ministry, after Ukraine's massive drone attack on Russia over the weekend, with Kyiv firing more than 150 drones at oil refineries, power plants across the country there. So, General, this is also getting worse. Your thoughts?
Yeah, well, the Ukrainians clearly want to change the narrative here. They've conducted a successful ground incursion into Russia, surprised the Russians with it. The Russians haven't been able to get them out of there yet. It likely will take months. And they're also very aggressively this weekend launched 158 drones to various regions in Russia, to include Moscow, just to change the narrative, to make certain the Russian people understand this war is not over, to make sure the United States and Europeans who are supporting the Ukrainians that this war is not over, this thing is not stalemated, that Ukraine is still in the fight and intends to be in the fight. What has changed, Maria, is Zelensky is willing at some point, likely next year, to go to negotiations, but he wants to have some leverage behind him. And taking the ground inside Russia and being aggressive gives them some of that leverage, because Russia is paying a price for some of this. So that's the issue. And also, I think Putin maybe, at least a speech he made this weekend, indicated for the first time that he may be receptive to some negotiations. That remains to be seen. It was a speech being made at a school, and we'll see if that actually turns into a policy. But clearly what Zelensky and his team is about is trying to change the narrative, get something behind them in terms of land that they've taken, the aggressiveness of their campaign, stopping the Russian offensive as best they possibly can, at least slow it down, and give them some leverage in negotiations with the Russians, so that Russia will move out of some of their territory, likely not all of it.
All right. We will be watching that as well. General, good to see you, sir. Thanks so much.